Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So the personal therapist training so it's something that I learned and that I have been practicing in my practicum classes, in my supervision, and actually as a therapist myself. So let me give you an overview of this, and especially hopefully give you some tools that you can use in your supervision. So first, I help allow me to locate myself. So I am Dr. Alba Niño. I'm originally from Colombia. I am a cisgender heterosexual woman and a mixed race Latina. And I immigrated from Colombia to the United States, and I have actually, this is the 8th state in the United States that I have lived in. So kind of, I'm getting the lay of the land. English is my second language. Spanish is my first language, and a lot of the work that I do is with Spanish-speaking clients or bilingual families, English-Spanish. I got both a master's and a PhD in couple and family therapy, and I mean, I am MFT to the core. So yeah, like I do. I do think that there's something special and unique about couple and family therapy. And every time that people talk, they say, oh, I love psychology. It's like, okay, if you love psychology, let me tell you about couple and family therapy, because this is a distinct profession. This is different. And there's a reason why I did my bachelor's in psychology and then I chose couple and family therapy, because I do think that there's something about the systemic thinking and relational thinking, and thinking about not only inside of the individual, but many layers outside of the individual, that is absolutely important for good therapy. So I'm also an approved supervisor. Clinically, the types of models that I practice are emotion and attachment-based therapies, trauma-informed therapy, and structural family therapy. And the way in which I learned about the personal therapist training, that, I mean, the acronym the acronym of that training is POD. And there are all sorts of jokes about POD and how important it is to do POD every day. And POD is what helps us to be good therapists and all that. So yeah, so the personal therapist training was developed by Harry Aponte. And I had the pleasure and the privilege to work with him for 3 years when I was doing my PhD at Drexel University. And I was co-teaching this class with him for 3 years. So that's how I learned it. So let me talk about the main premises and especially about the concept of the signature theme, which is the core concept here in the personal therapist training. So as I was saying, so the personal therapist training was developed by Dr. Henry Ponte in the 80s, So that means that like he has been developing this for good 4 decades. The goal of this type of training is to enhance the therapeutic effectiveness of the supervisees, the trainees, by helping them to use purposefully all of who they are in their clinical work. And so as we progress in the presentation, you're going to see what this means in terms of purposeful use of self. And one of the things that you're going to see is that this type of personal therapist work is not about how can we keep our staff outside. It's kind of the opposite. And so I'm going to explain that as I go. And as I mentioned before, the cornerstone, the pivotal concept here in this type of training is the concept of signature theme. By the way, I forgot to say that at the very beginning. If, as I'm talking, it's something that is not clear, or if there's any idea in your mind, like, please raise your hand right away. Don't wait until the end, because actually this helps to have more of a dialogue, and it helps to clarify things as we go. So, I mean, at this point, does anybody have any questions, comments, or burning anything? Okay. Okay, so let's continue. So let me just read this quote, which is, again, like one of those things that is in a quote, like in a nutshell, what we're talking about. The understanding and management of the use of self in therapy calls for an emotional opening of ourselves to ourselves within the therapeutic process with our clients, and the skillful and purposeful use of our personal sensitivity, insight, and human influence in the implementation of our clinical tools. So one of the things that every time that I read this quote, I like to highlight is this thing about opening of ourselves to ourselves. This is where this entire process begins, is with getting in touch with ourselves. And from there, basically learning and practicing how we can use that clinically. How can we use that in our supervision? How can we use that in our teaching? How this being able to be in touch with ourselves help us relationally. So let me talk about the main premises of the person of the therapist of this training is, so the first premise is that actually therapy is a human relationship and the therapeutic encounter is a living experience. And I mean, I know that in many ways, when we're talking about the fact that therapy is a human relationship, it sounds like, oh yeah, of course, I mean, duh. But if we pay attention to that and we just stay there for a minute, we're talking about the fact that our clients are human beings. Are we as therapists are human beings? And when we engage together in a therapeutic encounter, it is the engagement of human beings. Like before it is a professional encounter and everything, we're talking about human beings engaging with each other. And if you let it sink, and if you let it touch, like just entertain that in your mind for a second, you're going to see that this has more layers in terms of what that means for us to be present there as human beings when we're present in our therapeutic encounters, or when we are present in our supervisory encounters, what that means. And the other thing, when we're talking about the therapeutic encounter as a living experience, we're basically talking about how that connection is something that is experiential. We're talking about us as therapists experiencing the clients and responding to them, and the same way the clients are responding to us. And all that is a process that is a living experience. It is in the present. So again, that is one of the first premises of this work. The second premise is what is called the intentional use of self as is. And this basically refers to how the person who's going to be performing the therapy today, let's say, if I have a client at 10 p.m. after this class, the person that my client is going to get is the person that I am right now. And chances are that there are things that I still need to work on, but I cannot tell my client, you know what, wait until I finish like working on my stuff. And then when I'm done, then I can see you. Well, no, that's not the reality. That's not the world we live in. We live in the world where this is the person that I am right now. So instead of waiting for me to be perfect, to be a therapist, how can I actually use my imperfection, my experience, my struggles, and what I have learned from all of that? How can I use that clinically? That's what this training is about, and that is what this is the philosophy at the core of this approach. So, I mean, especially if we take into account that personal issues might never be resolved. And if we're, again, like if we keep telling our clients, okay, wait until I resolve my issues so I can be an effective therapist. So the clients are going to be waiting for a while. So instead of thinking about I need to be perfect and completely healed in order to be a therapist, There's something about seeing ourselves as wounded, being in touch with our wounds, and also basically reconnecting with that sense that our wounds can help us heal, that our experiences and our struggles and our imperfections can help us get in touch with what it means to be a human being. Okay, so our wounds can be powerful tools for empathizing and for strategizing, especially when we're talking about how our wounds can give us some intuition, can give us some experience, and how we can use that to guide our therapy. Everything okay?
Yeah, we had somebody just come to the door and ask if the air conditioning was working.
Okay, and is it? Are you cool?
Burning up.
That's my fault.
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you, Dr.
Okay. And the last premise that I want to share here is the premise that of the common humanity, that basically there's something, as much as we can acknowledge differences, and it is very important to understand how different people can have different life experiences and backgrounds. It is also important to get in touch with our commonalities, that there are certain experiences that we can share, that we can, even from our different social locations, we can find that commonality of looking at somebody who's very different from us and say, you know what, I understand what you're going through, and to connect at a human level. And part of this training is about that, is how we can connect at that human level. Okay, so I love this quote, so that's why I included it. I have to get comfortable with the fact that I am human and I have my flaws. And again, like, that can feel superficial, but a lot of the training that I do is about helping people feel comfortable with the fact that we're not perfect. Feel comfortable and be able to bring that to supervision. Be able to talk about the struggles that are happening, the areas in which we wish we were better, but we're not. There's something about that, getting comfortable with the fact that I am human and I have my flaws, that actually allows us to be very authentic, because it allows us to present ourselves without having to pretend, if we are just getting more comfortable with our imperfections. So that's part of, as a supervisor, that's part of the type of environment that I want to create with my supervisees. So now let me tell you about the 3 levels of person of the therapist work, which are the knowledge, access, and use. And as I am saying this, I want to highlight one thing, that hint. Notice that it doesn't say resolve. This is about noticing and getting to know, being able to access, and then being able to use. As a side effect, to be honest, there's a lot of issues that actually, like, we start getting in touch with more issues, we start getting working through things. But that's not the goal of this type of training. It happens as a secondary gain, as a side effect. But that's not what we're going for. What we're going for is this, again, knowledge, access, and use. Those are the 3 levels. And when we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about getting to know ourselves in all possible ways. So our emotionality, how do we respond emotionally and under different circumstances? Our cultural values that are guiding our perspectives, our strengths, our struggles, our signature theme, of course, and I'm in a couple of slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But when we're talking about knowledge of self, it also involves that capacity to notice our process as it is happening. That if we are in a therapy session, that I can notice, oh, I feel much closer to the this partner that I feel to this partner. That, oh, I mean, right now I'm having a hard time connecting with this mother when this mother is yelling at the daughter. That I can notice that as it is happening. That is part of that knowledge of self. And especially when we're talking about supervision, there's something about that capacity to report one's process to others. So it is important, again, for us as supervisors to create the type of environment where students can, or supervisees can bring that up, that they can bring what they're noticing. And I mean, and I that's the thing, that there's something about being able to create an environment where the supervisee can say, you know what, as soon as I hear this person, I immediately turn into the fix it mode, and I want to start telling them what to do, because I get frustrated with all the struggles that they're having, and I just want to solve their problems. And then I get out of the session and I'm like, okay, this is not the therapist I want to be. I want to create the type of environment in supervision where my supervisees can say that, without my supervisees thinking like, okay, so you see, you didn't do a good session because you were like in fix it mode, so you are going to get a bad grade, or you're not going to get a good, I don't know, feedback on your supervision. Because for me, the fact that they're reporting on their process means that they're taking ownership on their process. And that is what I'm aiming for from this perspective. So again, when we're talking about knowledge of self, those are the things that not only what we're getting to know, but also how we can notice in the moment and how we can share that in an environment like supervision. Now, access to self is that ability to look and reach into oneself, so these materials can be put to use in the therapeutic work. And one of the things that happens is that the deeper our knowledge of self, the more of us is going to be available in therapy. And I'm actually going to give you an example of a supervisee that I have right now, who was telling me, I mean, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the signature theme in a few slides, but basically part of her signature theme, part of her family history had to do with growing up with a mother who was basically had some borderline personality disorder traits. And this mother could blame my supervisee for her emotions. So basically the mother will say something like, okay, you see, you made me sad, you made me mad. And one of the things that this supervisee learned was, okay, so I need to be careful, because what I do affects the other person and I need to protect their emotions. And so one of the things that she told me is like, sometimes when I see that the other person is getting very upset or is getting uncomfortable, I feel like I immediately need to protect them. And like I start like getting my conversation in a different direction, because I don't want to go to that place where my clients are feeling uncomfortable, because that brings me all that training that I got since I was a little girl. And so that means that there are certain parts of her that she cannot access in therapy in those moments. Whenever it is important to be in an uncomfortable place, it is difficult for her to be there. And so she has to veer the conversation in a different way. Now, again, this is a person that can notice that and can report on that. And because of that, we can work on that in supervision. So that is the type of conversation that I'm promoting when I'm doing this supervisory work from the person of the therapist perspective. And then if I notice and if I have access, the idea is that I can be purposeful in the use of self in therapy. Because if I'm noticing what is going on with me and I can access different parts of myself, then I know I will be able to use myself more intentionally. I will be able to not be so reactive. And that at the end, that is the ultimate goal is, okay, so if I go through this entire process of getting to know myself better and getting access to different types of me, of like different areas of myself and my experience, then how can I use that in my clinical work? So actually, let me stop the share for a second for two reasons. The first one is to ask, how are we doing? Good. Any questions, any comments, any insights, any reflections at this point?
I have a question for you, Dr. Nicole. So
Yes.
one of my favorite parts of the therapist training and utilizing this in supervision is the second premise of the using self as is.
Yes.
Being in that professional role as is. And one of the things that I find particularly difficult, and one of the themes that I'm consistently working on, particularly beginning therapists with, is the integration of personal self and professional self, where it's almost as if they have to act as if they are a therapist, acting as if they have worked through, some of the things that maybe have brought them to therapy in the past. And I'm curious if that is a similar experience to something that you have, and how you navigate that. So ultimately, what I'm kind of trying to do is tell them that the hat that they wear as a professional therapist is the same hat that they wear in their everyday life, and that they're not two separate positions.
I mean, I understand. I didn't get the question completely, but so one of the things that I was hearing you say at the end is that thing that we're not talking about separate things, that when we're talking about ourselves as like personally and professionally, we're talking about the same thing. Did I understand correctly?
Yeah, so what I get with beginning therapists, because these are the supervisees that these individuals are working with,
yes,
is that they have to act as a therapist as if that's a separate thing than
yes,
just being them in the room.
yes. So I mean, one of the things, of course, I know, because whenever I'm teaching practicum class, that's what I see is at the very beginning is developmentally is okay. So especially when the students are having their first cases, so it's like the way they sit and the way they talk, and somehow they come up with these voices that are not the voices that they use in everyday life, and it like there's something about that is developmental, I will say, that is like, okay, so like I have never done this, how do I do it? And then it's just trying different voices and trying different selves and versions of selves. But again, hopefully we can guide them in terms of saying like, okay, you know what, the facade doesn't work. And the facade actually gets in the way in that human relationship that we were talking about. But the other thing is that as a person who has used facades, and I understand why, like where they come from and why we need them sometimes, that understanding of facades and that understanding of poses and postures and personas that we develop, that helps me say things to my supervisees in a way that I hope they feel understood. As much as I know that is something that we need to work on, as much as I know like, okay, that facade is not going to help you clinically, how can I use my experiences with facades, with pretending, to guide my words in a way that they feel empathized with, and in a way that they know, okay, so I guess my supervisor understands the struggle of starting therapy, like becoming a therapist, the struggle of trying to define an identity about becoming a therapist. So again, so I really try to use my understanding of the pretending and how it is so what we do when we don't know what else to do. So does that answer the question?
Absolutely, super clearly. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. So as I said before, so we were talking about 3 different levels, and we were talking about the level of knowledge, access, and use. And I want to share an example that actually Harry Aponte shared with us in one class, and that, I mean, I love that example. So Harry was working with a couple, and he had already like been working with them for a while, and he had already developed a good relationship with them. And at some point, the wife, basically Harry asked a question to the wife, and the wife said something to the effect of, well, it is really hard for me to trust him, referring to the husband. And the husband immediately stood up and got really angry and basically started to berate this woman, and this woman started to cry. And Harry was observing this. And one of the things that happened is that he started to feel that his hands started to become like fists, because he was basically ready to fight. He was getting ready to fight. And again, because he has done his work of knowledge of self, he knows that this happens when he's very afraid. Because when he was growing up, he had to fight and to defend himself a lot, because he actually was living as the only Hispanic person in the neighborhood. So he had to learn to fight. And so he knows, when I get this tense, when my hands become fists, when I get these sensations in my body, when I get this type of emotionality, what is happening is I'm afraid. So this situation here is making me afraid. And then it's like, okay, so how can I use, as I'm noticing this, how can I use this in therapy? And his clinical decision in that moment was to actually say to him, to the husband, you're scaring me right now. There are many ways in which we can use our experience. That was his choice in that moment, was to say that you're scaring me right now. And the husband stopped and looked at the wife and asked her, do I scare you? And she said, yes. And he sat down and basically started crying. And he said, I don't want to scare people. I don't want to scare my wife. And then, of course, the conversation went into a different direction after that interaction. But one of the reasons why I like that example is because we can see those three levels of what happens when we know ourselves. We know our different responses. We know, in this case, what happens when we get afraid. Okay, so when I get afraid, I start getting ready to fight because I feel that I have to defend myself. Literally the fight, not the fight flight response, the fight response. And then being able to access that. And by the way, this is one of the things that he does said. He said that Harry, he said that it took time for him to connect this with the fear. I mean, as a man in this society, especially as a man who had to grow up defending himself, to be able to say that is fear, to access that fear, that takes some work. So again, we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about accessing those different types of experiences that we have. And then we're talking about, then let's think about how we can use that clinically. And that is the use of self. And again, in this case, it became a question, a statement of, you're scaring me right now. And then, but that is, in a nutshell, those are the three levels that we're talking about. Okay. Any questions, comments, reactions, insights, like things that are coming through your mind as you're listening to this?
I have a question, because you talk about the hardest part is from the first phase to the second. But I'm wondering, like, from the second to the third, because I have some trouble like reacting in a way that I feel it's beneficial to the client or to the supervisee. So I wonder, like, does that mean a lot of training, or I guess it's awareness, but I wonder, like, what leads the use of from the access to self to the use of self.
Yes. So yes, it is about it is about practicing this constantly. Yes. Because I mean, it is the thing is, when we are supervisors and when we are training other people, we're training students and supervisors in different areas. So for example, we can train them in how to ask questions, and we can train them in a specific therapeutic approach. And as I shared before, I'm very much attachment oriented. So I will be using that with my supervisees. And so that takes time, like to start reading things from an attachment perspective, to learn how to ask questions. The same thing, this going from access to use, that takes time, that takes practice. But the thing is to have in mind how this is basically how I can use that experience that I'm having in the moment clinically, that if I put that as a question in my mind, that my own responses help me, then how can I use them clinically? I mean, we are the assessment tool in therapy. How we're responding to different members of the family, how we're responding to the interactions that they're having. Like, we are sensing all that with our bodies, we're sensing that with our minds everywhere. So it's like, okay, we are an assessment tool, so how can I use that? But that is just practice. Yes. That answered the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that had me thinking, Dr. Nino, about kind of some of the lessons we learn in our training around self-disclosure. Like, that feels to me like a self-disclosure, and how some of the messages around that is keep those cards close to you. You know, be very sparse in the self-disclosures, and do it only to essentially join with your client. So I'm wondering if that's potentially some of the barrier to that, and if you've gotten any messages like that, Dr. Nino, and how you integrated some of that in the conversation around self-disclosure with use of self.
Well, it is so funny that you're saying that, because let me show you the next slide that is coming. This is the next slide.
Nice.
So this is the thing. As I was saying before, when let's say I am with a supervisee and I see that the supervisee is having this persona, and I can understand how like wearing a persona or developing a persona is something that we do when we're not sure of ourselves, when we are when we're afraid, or when we're maybe feeling that we're not enough, like all these things. I can choose whether I can say, hey, I know what that is. Let me share something that happened with me. I don't even have to do that. I can know that experience, and then I can ask the supervisor, I'm wondering if in those moments when you sit like that and you start talking with that voice, I'm wondering if you're feeling that you need to become the therapist. So how is that for you? What I'm doing is I'm guiding my questions through my experience and my use of self. I have not disclosed anything. So use of self doesn't mean self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is one of the many ways in which we can use self. But one of the things is that self-disclosure can be very useful, especially for normalizing. But especially when we're talking about personal therapist work, that what we're talking about is not self-disclosure. What we're talking about is use of self. And by the way, Harry Aponte, one of the most, how do you say that? He doesn't like to disclose much about his life at all. And he's using himself constantly without divulging information about himself. Because it is about how we can read our signals, how we can use our experience, and then how we can make clinical decisions about how to use that. And many times the decision is, how can I use this in a question? How can I stop a process right now because I can see that this is very hurtful? And how can I redirect the conversation in a different way? All that can be like me using my experience without even self-disclosing. Yeah. Did that answer the question?
Totally, yeah,
Okay.
for me at least.
Okay.
The head's nodding over here.
Okay, good. So let's continue then. So the signature themes, the things that we have been talking about without talking about them. So now let's talk about them. So when we are talking about the signature themes, these are defined as lifelong ongoing issues or struggles that we have, that we find ourselves having in different relationships, and that sometimes, that many times are actually rooted in hurts or losses or traumatic events that have happened in our families. So, I mean, for example, in the example that I shared before with Harry, there was something about like, okay, so I have to protect myself because this world is dangerous. And that was part of his signature theme. With my supervisee, the other supervisee that I was talking about, there was something about this, okay, so like the emotions of other people are my responsibility and I have to carry those emotions and I have to be very careful with what I say. That was part of her signature theme. So again, these are things, these are struggles that we tend to have in our interactions, and they can happen when we're talking with family, and they can happen when we're talking with friends, and they can happen when we're trying to do grocery shopping and we're talking to the checkout person. That's the thing about them being the signature themes. It's like these patterns that repeat themselves in many instances. So we're talking about these issues and their manifestation. So how do they manifest emotionally? How, like, what type of thoughts are there, especially thoughts about ourselves? Like, oh yeah, my responsibility is to take care of everybody, or oh, I'm not good enough to even say something here and I have to put up a facade, all these things. Behavioral patterns, how do we behave because of our signature themes? Ways of relating to others. So this list that I'm including here, those are some of the things that my supervisees have mentioned and people that I have worked with. Fear of abandonment or fear of rejection, being a giver and having a hard time receiving, fear of failure or fear of being a disappointment, difficulties trusting others, need to always be in control. So again, so these are things that we find ourselves again and again struggling with. So they're central to how we establish relationships, how we make decisions, how we see the world, and how we resonate with with other people's woundedness. Because especially if we go through the knowledge of self and access of self, and we get in touch with these patterns and we get to know them and we get to read them and we get to know, like, yeah, I mean, and I actually understand those hurts and losses that are at the core. That type of knowledge is wisdom that then we can use to connect with our clients, to empathize with them, to connect at a much deeper level. So this is an example of a signature theme. So let's say that the signature theme is the need to achieve. So let's say that for this person, the wounds and losses that are at the core are verbal and emotional abuse by a parent, and achieving basically became a way of being safe and earning approval. And because of that, I mean, that can be a lot of fuel for looking for approval all the time. So what are the emotions that are associated with that signature theme of need to achieve? Being calm when accomplishing something, fear of making mistakes, shame when making a mistake. The thoughts can be something like, okay, my accomplishments prove my value. Whenever there's a mistake or something, it's like, oh, I'm such a failure. If others achieve and I can't, then I'm worthless. Some of the behaviors that can be happening there. So working really hard to demonstrate competence, sacrificing self-care for the sake of accomplishing a goal. And that can actually, again, like also be manifested in relationships. So being competitive rather than cooperative, needing approval and admiration from others. So, and something like this, again, I have seen this in my supervisees. And I have seen how, like thinking about the relating to others, how that need for approval and admiration can play a role with clients. And it's like, okay, so if my clients are saying like, wow, you're such a wonderful therapist, I'm going to continue doing the things that are going to get me that approval. And then, okay, so, but this is the thing, that if I have this capacity of knowledge, access, and use, then maybe I can decide whether I want to use that way or not. Whether this needing for approval, if the way I'm going to use that with my clients is going to be looking for their approval, or if I actually can stop myself and say like, you know what, no, that's not what I need to do. But also because of all these experiences that are like everything that is in the slide, if let's say that is my signature theme and I'm the therapist, I can intuit that if somebody is very competitive or has a hard time making a mistake, maybe there's something else in terms of, okay, what does making a mistake mean to you? Because sometimes it feels like, okay, that is a protective mechanism for something. And how do I know that? Because I have known that experientially. I know that experientially, and I can use that knowledge in the way I ask questions to my clients, in the way I can empathize. So that is how we can, this knowledge of the signature theme can become a well of wisdom in our clinical work. So this is something very important to keep in mind, because I have been talking about how we can get close to our clients and how we understand their struggle. But we also need to have this, we have to play in this balancing act of identification and differentiation. So I just want to read this. As therapists, we want to experience something of what clients are experiencing in their struggles, so we can intuit something of what they are dealing with. In other words, we want to experience some degree of identification with our clients. That resonance with clients through empathic identification brings us close to the client, sometimes so close that our own issues get triggered. Depending on how triggered we are, we can lose perspective, unable to see the client clearly because our own shadow gets in the way. That is why differentiation is the necessary other scale in the balance. So I'm going back actually to the question, like when the student was asking before, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, about, okay, so how can we go from access to use? And I said, well, practice. Then same thing here. So how can we do this balance? Practice. But one of the things that I know in my case, and when I do clinical work and when I do supervision, that really helps me with that balance of identification and differentiation is the therapeutic model that guides my work. Because my heart can go to my clients when they are sharing something. And at the same time, there's another part of my mind that says like, and clinically, I need to do this. Clinically, this is the direction I need to go. I need to, like, my heart needs to go to my clients, and at the same time, I need to do my work as a therapist. And one of the things that really helps me with differentiation and staying grounded in my work as a therapist is my the therapeutic models that I use. Okay, so now, as you can see, I'm absolutely biased. So from my perspective, this man is a genius for several reasons. That's like, these are the ones that I'm going to explain right now. The first thing is that he completely flipped the script. So from this perspective, our imperfections and struggles are not getting in the way. On the contrary, they are an asset. we can be great therapists not despite our struggles, but because of our struggles. And every time that I hear about the countertransference and how we have to keep our issues outside of the therapy room, and how like countertransference is like this contaminating and it is polluting the therapy, that type of conversation is so shaming. And it's basically like, okay, so how can I put my facade? How can I pretend that nothing is happening, that my issues are resolved? From this perspective, again, it is completely flipping like the story and saying, no. Actually, that experience of, oh, okay, I know what it means to need to achieve all the time and how that is what I have done to gain some appreciation. If I understand that, I can use that clinically, even if I still feel that, oh, that signature thing is there. So this understanding of countertransference and this thing of, okay, so you need to leave your stuff outside of the therapy room. No, first of all, it's going to come inside of the therapy room because you're in. You cannot detach those things. It's BS. So because it is coming with you, all those issues and all those struggles and your traumas and everything, then how can you use them? Because that is the root of wisdom. Now, the other thing that I think is genius in this work is to start with the signature theme. Because this is, I mean, we can start talking about awareness and self-knowledge of the person of the therapist. We can start talking about our strengths. And we can start talking about our gifts. That conversation is easy to have. But whenever we talk about our signature theme, and we're talking about that struggle, if we are able to access that and get familiar with that, and going back to what I said in one of the slides before, get comfortable with the fact that we're flawed, if we can do that, everything else about ourselves is going to become way more accessible. So it makes a lot of sense to start there with the signature theme. And this is the thing, I do this type of work in groups, and there's something absolutely scary about talking about our signature theme in front of others. And one of the things that ends up happening in these processes is this sense of, oh, I'm not alone, because I hear this story and this struggle that I have. I hear it in other people. And that helps for us to be more accessible to ourselves. So another thing that I think, again, is genius of this perspective is creating a training, supervision, and teaching environment where we can openly talk about our struggles to counteract the tyranny of shame. I can speak like from experience about this. Whenever I was in the position of being a trainee in my master's program, oh, I did so well. I presented the best work. I mean, I got all sorts of praises and everything. The parts that I was struggling with, they didn't make the conversation. And I suffered because of that. Because I had questions that I didn't allow myself to ask. And I carried that experience with me. And that is exactly what I don't want to happen in my supervision. I want my students and my supervisees to bring their struggles and to be able to talk about them. And for my supervision to be that type of environment. So basically, what my purpose is, and from this perspective, is to counteract the need to edit, to deny, to suppress one's own experience in the moment. And same thing when we're in therapy. So how all of our experience can be there. Okay, so let me stop the share for a second and let me ask you, how are you doing? How is this for you so far? Again, any questions, any comments, anything?
Let's see here. I think I'm still on I want to know, like, I know we're not supposed to, not necessarily that we're not supposed to use self-disclosure as the means of like, yourself, but I think I need another example of how to do that, of how to use yourself.
Okay, so this is the thing, that it's not that we're not supposed to use self-disclosure, is that use of self does not mean self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is one of the many ways we can use ourselves. But one of the things that happens every time when well, not every time, but many times when I'm doing this type of presentations, is that people say like, oh, use of self. So that means that I have to share my story with my client. Like, that's what we're talking about. That there are many ways that we're constantly using ourselves, and that we can make that use of self more purposeful. So, I mean, for example, I know that going back to that example of, let's say that I'm working with a parent that is very, I don't know, kind of aggressive or incisive with a child, and then the child is maybe intimidated. And I can feel that. I can feel that parent being intimidating. And I can feel how that is getting in the way of the connection. I can read my signals that help me understand this is intimidation. And I can intuit like this this adolescent might be feeling afraid right now of this parent like in this type of interaction. Then I can choose how I can react to that, and how I can do something clinically. And so, for example, a lot of the work that I do in a circumstance like that is to go to the parent and to say like, okay, how much do you think that you're feeling? How much do you think that you're connecting with your daughter right now? And then, I mean, start basically directing the conversation to how I want to help you to be a parent that is accessible, that your child can access you. But I need to start by asking the parent, like, do you think that your daughter is like, with the way you're responding, like your daughter is getting close to you? And but again, like that, in that moment, I'm not doing any type of self-disclosure. But in that moment, there are many signals in me that I'm telling me, this child must be intimidated by this mother. Now, let me tell you another thing. Same type of scenario, same type of clients, different therapists. It is very possible that there's a therapist that can join much better with the mother than with the daughter. Chances are that there's a therapist that says like, oh my God, I understand why this mother is so angry. And I will be hammering this daughter because how come like it is that sense of you keep yelling at and screaming at people and you get no response from them. And that is so frustrating. And it is very possible that if this therapist uses themselves in a way that they understand that process, they can also help clinically. And it's going to be coming from different signature themes and a different experience of the same mother-daughter duo. Is that clearer? Does that explain the whole use of self? Okay. And again, in those circumstances, there was no need for self-disclosure. I am not talking against self-disclosure. I'm just making that distinction. Use of self does not mean self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is one of the many ways in which we can use ourselves. Okay, any other questions, comments, reactions as you are listening to this?
Dr. Nino, have you ever experienced an inappropriate use of self? Oh, that you've had to maybe like guide and craft a little bit with the supervisee?
Yes, I mean, that's the thing that because it takes time and it takes a lot of work to develop. So yes, I mean, the whole joining too quickly with the client in a way that is not balancing with the differentiation. Yes, definitely. And again, like there are certain things that are signaling to me this dynamic here is not okay. Like if I see a supervisee who's too joined with one of the clients, it's like, okay, so this supervisee is losing perspective. And how can I communicate to the supervisee something in a way that, again, that is empathic enough, that I know how it is to feel so close to a client that we just basically we mesh together. And how can I give that feedback to the supervisee in a way that I'm not shaming, that I understand, yes, this happens. This is what happens when we're doing therapy, that we can get very close to our clients, that we feel for them so much that we cannot differentiate. And let me help you differentiate you. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, did I answer the question?
Yeah, because I mean, my guess would be in kind of the strategic way of addressing that, it would also be kind of moving backwards the knowledge and access. Meaning like if it's not a useful use of self, then it's probably not a true use of self, like through this model. So I'm just talking out loud.
Yes, but again, so there's something about the purposeful use of self that hopefully is not going to be reactive. Hopefully we're going to have that like millisecond where we are making the decision of what am I going to do right now.
Yeah, so I think for me, that's a helpful differentiation of all continuing to guide the supervisee to attune to how they are moving in the room and how they can, like, is this a reaction? Is this reactionary, or was this purposeful? Was this responsive? Was this grounded in some theory? So I think that's helpful in the guidance of,
yes,
you know, because I could see where there would be a supervisee, for example, who tries that use of self and then gets feedback from a supervisor to say, okay, I think I'm seeing something that might indicate a little bit of reaction. So then they're like, fine, I won't do it. So then just, okay, there are some indicators here on what this might be, so that you can kind of almost bumper yourself or parameter yourself in that to be more attuned to what is true use of self through this.
Yeah. And that's the thing, and that's why this entire process starts with, well, I mean, first of all, it starts with learning this philosophy, and second starts with talking about the signature theme, because the first exercises that we do have to do is all about self-awareness, because then we can take that self-awareness to the therapy room. Now, this is something that happened recently, and I was talking to another professor, Tom Carlson, and I mentioned the portable supervisor. And that is I use that all the time. And I said, so basically, one of the goals that you have to have basically in as a therapist is to have your own portable supervisor, which is my way of saying like that you're observing yourself as you are existing basically in therapy. And he looked at me like, portable supervisor, that is like a very interesting concept, that sense of self-awareness and everything. I'm like, and I was thinking like, is that new? Like, how is that weird? How is that something that capacity for constant self-assessment and looking at yourself constantly in the process? How is that weird? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing all the time? And then you're like, well, that's not necessarily what the supervision says that we need to do. And then is when I realized that everything that I know about supervision, I know from the person of the therapist. So this for me, this capacity of noticing oneself and developing that observing self, that is at the core of this work. And that is not emphasized in other supervisory approaches. Yeah. So, and that goes back to your question in the sense of, if let's say there's a person who said like, okay, so I use myself this way and this like, okay, it backfired, it didn't work. Then let's go back to what was going on with you in that moment. When you were asking that question that seemed to be very intrusive for the client, or when you made that self-disclosure that seemed to be very intrusive with the client, let's walk back and tell me what was going on with you. So that is part of the let's observe, let's be very mindful of your own process as it is happening. Okay, I'm talking about being mindful. I know that Herlin had her hand up, and it had been up for a while, and then I just wanted to answer this question before going to you. Yes.
No, thank you, Doctora Niño, for that presentation on emphasizing use of self. My question was more so like an example of what you may dictate is like appropriate, inappropriate use of self in and out of therapy. sessions, particularly in an agency. So for example, like you said, over caring or being almost overprotective of a client that you really see needs a space for like more than just mental health, right? Crisis management and so on. So use of self outside of the therapeutic process, more so like making sure at the agency they get connected to lawyers, making sure that even the case managers are being communicative with you and being on top of their work, like, hey, let me know when they're going to have another parent teacher conference so I can be in that. I know the children are autistic, are on the spectrum. So being, I mean, from my personal experience, I think I was almost told you're stepping out of your boundaries with this use of self, and that isn't appropriate. You're being almost like, oh, overprotective, like your focus is mental health. So in your perspective, seeing your presentation, which was very refreshing, what is your opinion with that form of use of self for that particular client? And
so one of the first things I will need to go to, again, like this entire approach starts with the signature theme. And I will be very mindful, for example, if part of the signature theme of this supervisee is being overcaring. And if what is happening is a manifestation of that signature theme. And if it is a manifestation that can actually be counterproductive for the client. Sometimes, especially when I'm working with people who are over functioning in like that's part of their signature theme, what happens is that the client ends up being under functioning, and that is what affects the therapeutic work. And that actually as much as the person is feeling like, oh, I just really want to care for this client, and at the same time I understand that this client needs to develop certain capacities for themselves, then my overcaring and my overprotecting can get in the way, so I need to step back. It is let's say that is the signature theme. And so depending on that, then I will be providing certain feedback to my supervisee. If the signature theme of my supervisee has to do more with, actually, I tend to be quiet all the time, and I don't tend to do things like, and I see things happening, I tend to be quiet because I have learned that my opinions don't matter. But you know what, I had to tell my supervisor, no, we need to get engaged in, like, it cannot be just therapy. This person needs some legal advice. We need to look for some legal advice here. Then it's like, okay, so actually at this point, let's say that you're not responding reactively to your signature theme. You are like, the voice of your signature theme is there. And at the same time, you're making the intentional decision of, I need to speak up. So it depends on the situation. It depends on the situation and what can be the struggle of my supervisee in it. And as the how to say that, like the goal, the benchmark, the final line, whatever it is, the aim is the effectiveness of the clinical work. So is the fact that the supervisee, let's say, is reaching to these different agencies and looking for this extra support for the client, is that helping with the clinical goals or not? So like those would be the questions that are in my mind when I'm thinking about that. Okay, so let me share just one. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides, and then I'm going to go here. So everything that I have shared so far is pretty much the philosophy of the person of the therapist. And this is basically translated into some specific exercises. So when we start doing this type of supervision, and when I do personal therapist work with people, I start with a similar presentation like this one. And then I go to present the signature theme and everything. And then there's a paper that the students have to write, or the supervisors have to write. And these are the different elements of that paper. So describe what is your signature theme, the genogram, family history, and background in general, and how that connects with the development of the signature theme. What is the struggle that we have with the signature theme? So maybe like how is like, let's say that the signature theme again is that need to achieve. When does that need to achieve like really gets loud and very active? And when does that just, it's like, it's something that you can manage better. And then how, like if it is starting therapies, it's like, how do you think this is going to be playing out in your clinical work? And if it is seasoned therapies, it's like, how does this play out in your clinical work? And that is the starting point. So we start with this type of paper and this writing about it, and again, this reporting on it, because one of the things that we want from in this in this type of work is for people to be able not only to notice and to know, but to be able to talk about it and to share and to report and to count on us as supervisors in the discussion of these signature themes. So this is one of the tools that we use, this type of paper and this type of discussion around this paper. And what happened? There is another paper that we have, which is the clinical case presentation. And this is, I mean, like the type of for example, papers that you write as a in practicum class that you have to write like whenever you're presenting a client, but it will be from a person of the therapist perspective. So yes, you're going to include the information about the clients, the information about your clinical approach and your model and everything. And in each of those, you're going to start thinking like, okay, so what is my signature theme? How does my signature theme help me with the connection with the clients? How does it help me with the assessment of the client? How it can help me with the way I'm intervening with my clients? So again, this is another instrument that we use in which the whole use of self becomes more tangible with specific clients. And this allows us to have conversation about like, okay, so what is the struggle that you're having right now? Is it just like something technical, like I don't know how to phrase these questions, and then like I can help you to have like how you phrase those questions? Or is it something a little bit more core in terms of the signature theme? And then also we can work with that. So yeah, so let's stop here. So yes, so that this is in a nutshell what the personal therapist training is and how to do supervision from this perspective. So I don't know, I don't know where to go from here. So any questions or comments or reactions? Or the other thing is, do we have any more time?
Sure, we can make time.
We can make time. We have the machine that makes time.
Yes.
Okay, so if we do, I would like for us to take some of that time that our machine can make and take the time to answer these questions, everybody by themselves. So if you can take a piece of paper and just read those prompts that are in the screen and just write what comes to you. This is not something to share with anybody. This is you with you. And so these are some questions that can help you identify that signature theme. So, oh, no, these are not the questions. I'm sorry. Oh, no. That's not, I'm so sorry. That's not it. That's not it. Let me look for it. Okay. That's not it. Sorry. Oh, this is it. Sorry. Okay, so these are some questions that hopefully will help you like start like identifying that signature theme. So what is your biggest source of anxiety and or biggest fear in relationships? For example, not being good enough, being rejected, not being taken seriously. Again, all of those examples from people that we have worked with. Is there something about yourself that you would prefer other people not to know? What do you do to keep people from knowing this? Is there a characteristic of yours that somehow limits you in your functioning and relationships? For example, not wanting to be needy, thus pretending to always be strong and independent, and as a result, never asking for help and feeling alone when in crisis. How do you usually deal with stress? Is there a reaction to stressful situations or interactions that seems to cause problems? Looking back at your life, can you recognize a recurrent pattern in your functioning and relationships that doesn't work well for you? So those are the questions. So I'm just going to give you some time for you to sit with them, and just whatever is coming to your mind, allow that to come to your mind. how are you doing? Do you need more time? Or are we okay?
You've got some work to do.
I know, really.
One of my students just asked, what if you don't have an answer to one or more of the questions?
I mean, this type of questions are just to get the juices flowing. And if at this point there's no juice flowing, so just put the question in the back of your mind and eventually will come.
I think we're good over here, Dr. Nino.
Okay. Okay, so let me stop the share then. And let me ask you, how was the experience of reflecting on this? This is not about, okay, so what did you answer for question number 1, question number 2? No, it's more like, how was the experience of engaging with these questions? So, anybody wants to share how it was? Yes, okay, so somebody is enthusiastically raising her hand.
When I was in practicum, we did like in our sub-therapist section, we had to go through the signature themes. So I pulled out my old one that I did like 2 years ago, kind of like reflecting on everything throughout this conversation. And I feel like it's from the experience, it's like you're constantly moving, because some of the things that I have on my presentation, I don't feel that way anymore, or it has been either worked through or understood in a different light, that back then I was able to look at it on a more surface level. And then the funny part about it is that there are some of the things that, even though like, I don't know if you can see it, it's like very lengthy. I have like a full things that I wrote about myself. Even with this much work put into it, today I'm seeing a lot more that I didn't see before. So I guess to conclude my answer, we're humans and we like shift and change. And, you know, it's not like a setback, but I recognize a lot more that I did before. The questions you provided.
Okay, and so if I it was a little bit hard to hear what you were saying because of the distortion and everything of the electronic transmission. But if I understood correctly, there was work that you have done before specifically around the signature theme.
Yeah.
And that now reflecting on this again, there are many other things that you're seeing that maybe you were not seeing before.
Yeah.
So I don't want to put words, but what I was understanding is that like there's more complexity in the understanding of the signature theme.
I think so. More.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering as I'm listening to you is whether that means that there are some things that you have become more aware of that before you were not that aware of.
Yeah, even I can give a specific example.
Okay.
So in the article by Aponte on signature themes, I remember the name. It's like, if I can grapple with this,
Yes.
Yeah, that one. One of the examples talks about the neediness, which was in your presentation as well. And I used to resonate with that and not wanting to be needy. So that was like one of the main themes that I touched on and I kind of worked through. But turns out it was actually the opposite. I recognize now that I am a needy person, and what I was kind of grappling with back then was the opposite, like a projection of like the fantasy of what I wanted to be. And so if I were to utilize that information, it was kind of working against myself, because it was the same theme, but it was touched on from the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I'm lying to people that I'm not needy. To You know what I mean?
And so how is that awareness of, like, because it's like you're having an awareness of, okay, so this is not what I was thinking it was. I'm realizing it is a different dynamic. How is that awareness affecting you? The fact that you're understanding something different about your own process.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I do have a question.
Yes.
For example, we're talking about like the characteristics and things that affects us in our relationship. I find myself with from the question that you asked earlier, that it's borderline like supervision and like personal therapy. So how do you navigate that?
So, again, that is a question that we get constantly. And one of the things is that we start the process talking about ourselves personally, talking about, okay, so this is my struggle, this is my family history, these are my values, this is my social location, these are the things that make me, me. And part of the process at the very beginning is, okay, and so let's talk about that process. Let's talk about your emotions. Let's talk about how you notice that. Let's talk about when that, for example, that signature theme gets stronger. Let's see like some other ways in which you feel like, okay, no, in those areas, my signature theme doesn't show up. In these other areas, oh my God, it's like I cannot control it. All that is very personal. There's a lot of getting used to talk about self and explore the self and report on the self and track your own process. There's a lot of work on that at the very beginning. And then we start talking about cases. And then we start talking about clinical work. And so how do you see that? How is that manifesting in this interaction that you're having with this couple that you're working with? How is this happening? Like, how is this showing up when you're supervising? Especially for all of you that are working on supervision. So how are these signature things maybe playing out a role there? And so the discussions there, like once we get a little bit more comfortable reporting on self and talking about self and the knowledge and the access, then we go to the use. Okay, so how we can use self in supervision, in therapy, and the conversations stay there. So this is one of the ways in which it goes from the personal to the professional. And yes, so and it basically, that is our goal. Invariably, as a side effect, this affects personal relationships. The fact that in my experience, the fact that the person understands their process better and the training that we do for them to use themselves purposefully in therapy means that they end up using themselves more thoughtfully and purposefully outside of therapy. That is a side effect. That's not our goal. That's not our aim, but it happens. The other thing is that, as I mentioned at the very beginning, when we were talking about the three levels, the knowledge, access, and use, it doesn't say anything about resolving issues. It is about like, are you aware of that? Like, can you notice that when that is happening? And then once you notice that, what can you do in that moment? And again, like that millisecond in which you're actually making a decision. And is that distance between the reactivity of the signature theme and you making decisions, even though you're noticing your signature theme right there. It like the goal of this is not to resolve it. And the fact that you become aware of it actually softens it a little bit, but that's not the goal. So I will say that is how we make that distinction between this as something that is professional work as much as it is centered in the person of the therapist. And that is how this is not therapy. As much as it can have therapeutic effects, our goal and our questions and our focus is how can I help this person do very well clinically. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, okay. Okay, so I mean, like it has already been an hour and a half. So I think that it's time for a break, I guess.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your interest. I hope that this was a useful conversation. If you're interested and want to learn more, then let me know. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me. I'm glad that we made it happen.
Yes, me too. I'm so grateful. And I hope that you're enjoying the Midwest.
Yes, I am. And I mean, this is the thing. I'm surrounded by boxes. They deliver all my belongings a day ago.
Wow.
And so I'm still unpacking. So I haven't completely arrived. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm from your neighbor to the east, your neighbor that's touching Lake Michigan. So I'm from Michigan.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
No, and this is the thing I didn't know, and I have to do it soon, that there's a ferry from where we live to